discussed in the home of sustainable agriculture of the America. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to the moderator, Lois Wright-Morton.
All right. Good morning. Good morning, all. It's great to have you here.
Speak into it. It's handy, you have to hold it up.
Okay.
You don't need your.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Excellent. All right. It is great to have you here this morning. Everybody has their coffee, right? So you've got a little thing to keep you awake. That's wonderful. I'm Lois Wright-Morton with Solutions from the Land. And Solutions from the Land is an NGO, a farmer scientist-led organization that's very interested in helping farmers work towards solutions and solving some of the many problems that they have to be a smart agricultural system. I am a commercial blueberry grower in Northeast Ohio, so I'm a farmer for a number of years. And this topic, invasive species, is very, very dear to my heart. I don't know how many of you know much about fruit growing, but the spotted-winged Drosophila fruit fly came into the United States via California, AG. We blame everything on California. And as it moved to the Midwest, it began to decimate all the small fruits, the blue and red fruits, blueberries, cherries, strawberries, by planting larvae in the fruits themselves, and moving us to, as the temperature warmed, particularly in the summertime, then the reproduction cycle of this fruit fly would accelerate and create a lot of problems for the quality of fruit. And so my remedy, part of my remedy has been to, I have 3/4 of an acre of blueberries, which is about 500 shrubs under an exclusion net, an entire 3/4 of an acre that's under a netted structure. And under that structure, or to get into that structure, has a double zippered door, just like you go into a butterfly house, so that when we go in as picking or to do IPM, then we're able to monitor what's in without bringing more of the fruit fly in. It's been very successful. I've done some IPM testing with Ohio State University, one of our land grant universities, and they have found over a period of 3 years that there was no presence of spotted-winged Drosophila within the netted structure. We also did a control, and I had quite a few outside, so that's so you can see why this topic is very, very exciting to me, pretty important, and the fruit fly is just one tiny small in the invasive species conversation that we have. But it's part of the motivation for why we as farmers in Solutions from the Land are concerned about that. In this particular event, we're going to especially talk about how a changing climate, how weather and precipitation are accelerating the negative aspects of invasive species and the effect that they actually can be having on marine, terrestrial, freshwater ecosystems around the world. Let me define invasive species for a moment before we begin. And our USDA defines that as a non-native plant, animal, insect, fish, fungus, bacteria, any living organism in it. So it could also be seeds, it could also be eggs that are colonizing places that they should not be colonizing. I think many of you have already noticed that I live in a temperate zone, and the temperatures are very much moving along with the precipitation being a lot more erratic. The IPCC sixth assessment report actually has found very high confidence that climate change is altering marine, terrestrial, freshwater ecosystems. The loss of biodiversity increases. Invasive species is being exacerbated by climate change and are threatening local and global food security and livelihoods. So the really important thing to remember is that invasive species don't know any boundaries. So it doesn't matter that you've crossed over into Republic of Georgia, or you've gone to Russia, or you've gone to Turkey, or whether in my instance Canada or Mexico, the invasive species aren't paying any attention to the geography of that. And so we actually have a nice geographic representation of some of the things that this is happening to. The order for today's presentations, we're first going to have a pre-recording from Donna Lawley, who is an Associate Administrator for USDA Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. And in our country, we call that APHIS. That's how we refer it to, because it's a mouthful. And then after that pre-recording, we will have our panelists have an opportunity to talk a little bit about their geography and what they're thinking about in terms of invasive species. We'll start with our first panelist, Dr. Elrike Krause from the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. And then we will move to Michael Crinlin, a Wisconsin dairy farm, representing the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers in Action. And then we have Jose Mai, Minister of Agriculture and Food Security from Belize. Welcome. It's great to have you here. Thank you for joining us. And then our last panelist will be A.G. Caramaro, who is a former California Secretary of Agriculture, a California specialty crop. I'm in Solutions from the Land. I am the small commercial specialty crop grower, and AG has a lot of experience with larger scale specialty crops. So we make kind of a nice balance that goes with that. And then hopefully I've had a couple of audience members ask if there'll be time for Q&A from the audience, and hopefully there'll be some time to do that. So with that, let's begin by listening to Donna Lawley from APHIS, from the USDA Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, kind of set the stage.
Hello and good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank AG and Solutions from the Land for inviting me to speak today. I'm sorry I can't join you in person. I'm Donna Lawley, Associate Administrator at the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, APHIS. For more than 2 decades, I've focused on advancing plant health as a geneticist and biochemist. I've worked within APHIS, USDA, and the White House to champion science-based policies and support those working in scientific disciplines. Safeguarding U.S. agriculture and natural resources against invasive species is a critical part of USDA's mission, and APHIS does a lot of that work. For over 5 decades, APHIS has worked to protect the health of U.S. agriculture and natural resources. APHIS employees operating throughout the United States and across the world work every day to prevent foreign pests and diseases from entering the United States. These pests and diseases have a variety of ways to get here. Carried by hitchhiking pests, on imported cargo, infested or infected plants, or food brought in by travelers, infected animals shipped from overseas, or even deliberate agroterrorism attempts. With $125 billion annual impact in the United States alone, invasive species endanger our native species, reduce our food security, and significantly impact our quality of life. APHIS works at every level to stop the spread of invasive species and reduce their impact on America's agriculture and natural resources, whether through prevention, eradication, containment, or long-term management. Changes in the climate, including extreme weather events and temperature patterns, are causing some very real changes in our environment. As the planet continues to experience these environmental changes, the threat of pests and diseases will only grow. Plant pest life cycles are increasing due to changes in temperatures, and habitat changes are expanding the range where pests can survive and spread. Climate maps are among the early detection tools we have to come to rely on. Last year, USDA released new plant hardiness zone maps. These maps are based on 30-year averages of the lowest annual winter temperatures at specific locations. They were developed using more sophisticated mapping methods than the previous maps and data from more weather stations. The new zones defined by these maps reflect significant shifts in the climate. More generally, predictive maps and data drive our preparedness and response efforts by helping us determine where pests could potentially move next. This allows us to more appropriately allocate resources for research and survey programs. While it is clear that the plant health is closely linked to environmental conditions, we are keenly aware of the connections between the environment, plant health, animal health, and human health. USDA takes a One Health approach in its efforts to protect animal and plant health. The term One Health captures the interconnected nature of the global health challenges we face in animals, plants, humans, and the environment. But it also captures the worldview and collaborative approach needed to meet those challenges. In addition to the changing climate, global health is impacted by the fact that more people and commodities are traveling internationally at great speed. In combination, these factors apply the opportunities for invasive species to find new environments where they can thrive. Here is just one example. For more than 2 decades, New World screwworm has been eradicated from North and Central America. However, since last year, it has started to reemerge and expand into Central America. This devastating pest impacts livestock health as well as human health. USDA has directed emergency funds to help Central American countries respond to this outbreak. We are working with ministries of agriculture, environment, and public health to improve surveillance, regional veterinary services, and increase outreach to producers and stakeholders. Another example, closer to home, we are fighting the spread of exotic fruit flies, which are among the world's most devastating pests of fruits and vegetables. Last year, California faced an unprecedented invasive fruit fly outbreak, the worst of its kind faced by the California Department of Food and Agriculture in its 100-year history. USDA provided significant emergency response funds, and APHIS deployed hundreds of employees on an emergency basis to help California responders with trapping, fruit removal, and survey activities. Together, we successfully eradicated that incursion, but there has since been other outbreaks, and there are still exotic fruit fly quarantines in California. Looking ahead, we don't know which pest and disease threats we might face, but situations like the New World screwworm reemergence and fruit fly infestations will likely expand and accelerate. As we face future challenges, we must keep science at the core of our work. Whether a domestic or international response, APHIS will use all available science and data to formulate our invasive species preparedness and response actions. Better information means better preparedness, which improves our chances of acting proactively rather than merely reacting to events. We have learned that when it comes to combating invasive species, prevention is the most efficient and least costly method. As non-native species become more established over time, the effort and cost of addressing them escalates exponentially. I am grateful for groups like this that bring together leaders of agriculture, forestry, conservation, academia, and industry to focus on these issues of climate change, food security, and economic development. We must leverage all partner networks because it's going to take all of us working together to prevent the spread of invasive pests and diseases. Thank you again for inviting me to speak. I hope you have a great panel discussion today.
Okay, I think Donna's done a really nice job. Can you hear me? Yes, good, thank you. Has done a nice job of sort of framing the context of the things that are going on. Now we're going to dig just a little bit deeper and hear from our panelists some of the issues that they're dealing with, and importantly, what are some of the solutions that they're finding. And I want to start with Dr. Kraus from the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. And I have 2 questions for her, and she's got some slides that she's going to use to answer those questions. It's been estimated that about 42% of threatened or endangered species are due to risk that invasive species bring. And so we've already heard a little bit, but there's a relationship between invasive species and the plant, animal, microbial biodiversity that happens within countries or within regions. And so, Dr. Klaus, would you sort of talk about the kinds of actions and solutions that you think are really necessary to address those issues in the Caribbean?
Thank you, Louis, and thank you to ICA for inviting me to sit on this panel. So just to give you a little bit of a synopsis of what has been done in the Caribbean, because it might not be a region very well known here, there has been a large GEF-funded project implemented by CABI, mitigating the threat of invasive species in the insular Caribbean in 5 Caribbean countries. Basically, every country updated or established a national invasive species strategy. Overall, those 5 countries and other partners, other countries, drafted a regional invasive species strategy, and then each country had the option to put in pilot projects on the ground according to their own national priorities. And initially Cuba was part of that group of 6, but after the PDFA phase of GEF, if you know the funding cycle, they decided it was more advantageous for them to implement a national project, and that's what they did. But we did come together for our closing workshop under MITIASIC, went to Cuba and always compared notes. So there is a lot of integration and coordination already. As a follow-up project, CABI got GEF funding to implement the COST project in Barbados and the OECS, Organization of Eastern Caribbean States countries. So there are quite a few countries involved. And there are also a couple of dependent countries, dependent islands. The Royal Society for the Protection of Birds from the UK works in the overseas territories. The French, I should mention, and the Dutch also have programs on their dependency. But clearly a regional integration is needed and continuity, because this was project funding, and as you can see, those projects have ended. Donna has already alluded to the management cascade and the importance of prevention. I can only second that. It is the most cost-effective management approach out of the 4 strategies that should be used against invasive species. Very critical here is pathway management. Unfortunately, that is extremely hard to sell to policymakers, because you do not win votes by saying we have continued successfully to prevent a problem. It is the non-visible success. And policymakers do not like to invest in that, although they should. The next step, if prevention fails and an incursion occurs, is early detection, rapid response, which seems to have worked in California, but frequently, certainly in the Caribbean, the response is too slow. And if you don't nip it in the bud very early, very quickly, you lose that step. And then you have to move to eradication and or containment, but eradication also has its problems. It's a term used very often, and we get a lot of proposals aiming for eradication. And very often you control 99%, 99.5%. Unfortunately, that is not enough. If you have 1 pregnant rat, if you have 2 or 3 fruit flies left, eradication has failed, even if you have eliminated, not eradicated, eliminated 99.99%. So it is problematic and expensive. If you fail in those 3 steps, and often you do, you can only do impact mitigation, population control to keep the damage as low as is possible, and that is a continuous cost. So that then has to move from projects to government programs, and it will be cost on those countries, on their livelihoods, on their biodiversity, because it needs surveillance, maintenance, following restoration, even if eradication is successful, the ecosystem or the agroecosystem is restored. So that points towards the need for regional and independent finance mechanism to fund that kind of work. And that is where the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund comes in, my organization, because our mission is to ensure continuous funding for conservation and sustainable development in the Caribbean. We are an umbrella environmental fund with a flexible structure and implement innovative solutions for resource mobilization in the Caribbean through a range of financial instruments, and currently manage around $176 million. The CBF, together with National Conservation Trust funds, form the Caribbean Sustainable Finance Architecture. We have 3 programs. For this presentation, the Conservation Finance Program is the most important one. Those who were here yesterday have seen this slide. So there's an endowment fund, and basically every country in this endowment fund has a sub-account and can harvest from the revenue that is produced. The principal is not touched. So the donors in that case the German government, put up $80 million, and the countries can harvest and implement projects on a competitive basis from the revenue. We also have two sinking funds. Mostly I speak about the ecosystem-based adaptation, but not today. So the innovative idea for this panel is that in addition to national conservation trust funds, we are now thinking about a thematic trust fund on invasive species. And there we come back to CABI as a partner. And under the OACS project, they commissioned a study by Gardner et al. To identify sustainable financing mechanisms to combat IS challenges in the Caribbean. And again, prevention came out as the one we have to promote and go for, and it requires a structured regional approach. The consultants analyzed two options, a trust fund and policy options, and I should say they're not mutually exclusive. They should go hand in hand, but they're strong selling points for a trust fund. The CBF has the functional infrastructure in place and the Caribbean sustainable finance architecture, so the CBF is supposed to serve as fund manager because we have the critical mass to make actually revenue from any investment donors put. There's oversight provided by the Latin American Caribbean Network for Environmental Funds, REDLAC. They have practice standards from the Conservation Finance Alliance, so there's solid financial oversight. The policy options come in through governments, mainstreaming support, and CABI, with its almost 80 years of experience in managing IAS in the Caribbean, is to serve as secretariat and oversee the interventions on the ground. This is the proposed structure. We have the in green, the existing endowment of the CBF. We have the two sinking funds as the facilities. The purple is the proposed new one, the CABI Endowment Fund, which then would harvest revenue for CABI and its partners in parallel to what we already do with our national conservation trust funds. And those funds could then go into national or regional projects, NGOs, CBOs, academia, private sector, seed funding, etc. We've done some groundwork. So we've done all the preliminary negotiations and clearance. We have signed a MOU with CABI, between the CBF and CABI, and under that OACS project, an action plan has been developed. So we are now at that stage of CABI raising the funds to actually capitalize the endowment, because that is the most critical step to get done. Basically, the CBF has the investment management system in place, so as soon as CABI gets the money, we can move ahead and have the detailed agreement and create the sub-account. What are the financial needs? The estimates are that about $120 million are required to capitalize the endowment. The operating costs would be $450,000 per year roughly, and the annual returns 3% plus inflation. Grants could then come out of the revenue and start as low as $10,000 and up to whatever merit and revenue is available under the sub-account. And that should be complemented at the national level by the policy options such as taxes, user fees, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think you've did a nice job of talking about what I always think. In the United States, the Caribbean is a treasure. It's just a wonderful place of biodiversity and tropical animals and plants. So it sounds like you're off to a good start. But at the high level, we can do lots of things in terms of structure. But the next thing is to think about agriculture and think about the people and the communities at the individual level. How do they deal and support the kind of work that you're doing, or the kind of work that we're doing in the United States? And our next speaker, Michael Crinan from the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers in Action chair, and more importantly, a dairy farmer from Wisconsin. You have a livestock, and I'm sure that disease and invasive species are of concern to you, that you're monitoring them, you're paying attention at the individual level, so that kind of goes hand in hand with the kinds of things in terms of policy and financing that we do at a higher level. So, Michael, talk a little bit about what you, as as a farmer, are doing on your farm to sort of pay attention to what's happening. And what are some of the solutions that you're trying to sort of put in place?
Right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me on the panel here today. Yes, I'm a dairy farmer, and one of the things that we've done, sort of a pest that was in the dairy industry, was flies, and still is for calves, but these cause a lot of pink eye. And we have now developed our new barns. They're all cross-ventilated barns, and it was mainly done for keeping the cows cool during the summer. But what we have found is, because there's a slight negative static pressure, flies don't like being in the buildings. So we don't have to treat the cows, or when they're, we can stop the spread of pink eye, so which has been a nice co-benefit is right. Then where we're located, we're actually one of the benefits of climate change, because the Corn Belt is moving west and north about 6 miles every year. So what we're seeing now is that we can grow more crops on the fields just around the dairy, and so that way then the fields are close enough that we can apply our nutrients from the dairy farm to it. We're cutting down on artificial fertilizer being spread, you know.
So do you see some of your cropping systems are having trouble with disease and insects because of the extra precipitation? The temperature of course changes what kinds of insects and disease you have to deal with. Are you seeing any impacts?
Well, I have to admit...
Or weed pressure. Maybe I should talk about weed
yeah,
pressure.
I have to admit, we actually just have the dairy farm. We work with 9 neighbours that grow all our crops for us. And yes, they have been dealing with some more weed pressure. What they've been doing is learning from farms further south, doing more crop rotations, and that has worked well. We're now actually bringing, because of some changes, we've been bringing some grasses into the rotation. And whereas it used to be always corn and soybeans in our area, now we've a cocktail of different types of grasses, and that has really helped the soil.
Yeah. Well, in our northeast region, we're seeing a lot more weed pressure in our corn and beans, and our current herbicides aren't working. So.
Yeah, well, and we have to go back and look at what they were doing 50, 100 years ago, where you had to do a lot of crop rotations to try and keep weeds under control.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Our next speaker, our panelist, is Jose Mayo, a Minister of Agriculture and Food Security and Enterprise from Belize. And Minister, would you talk just a little bit about what your country and the countries in your region are doing in order to manage invasive species? As we've talked about, they know no boundaries, no borders, and I'm sure that you have issues cross-border. And what kind of cooperation are you doing? What kind of challenges are you seeing in your country that are harming agriculture, threats to humans, animals?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this discussion. Very important discussion, and very relevant at this time. One thing is very clear before we begin discussion, but statement has to be made, that with the recent outbreaks, there's a direct relationship with these recent outbreaks and climate change. That is factual. First, we must understand invasive species. There are a few things that are important to know about it. One is that it is alien to your ecosystem. The second, that it will cause economic, environmental, and human harm. And the third, that it is transported by humans, either voluntarily or involuntarily. But those are 3 main important points when speaking about invasive species. Now, nature has a way of keeping things in check, in balance. The example of tilapia. We all know the tilapia fish, which is indigenous to regions in Africa. And one tilapia fish would provide enough protein for a child going to primary school. And so that was the promotion given. Brazil loved the idea, adopted the concept, and imported this species of tilapia, because they have certain species too, but this is a species that grew very fast, extremely fast. It was very prolific. And they had an excellent project going on also. Guatemala also liked it, and they started. But you have to understand that this species was not found in Central America. I think it wasn't even in Brazil. There was a genus, but not that specific one. Something happened, and the tilapia now found its way in the waterways. 15 years ago in Belize, when we first had tilapia, everybody was like, what the hell is going on? I mean, this fish is just tearing apart and devouring all the native species we have. We have a famous fish in Belize, which everybody loves. It's native. We refer to it as the freshwater snook, or what they call it, bay snook. White. It's a carnivore. It feeds on other types of fish. And so that was the first native species to decline. Actually, it almost went to extinction because tilapia lays much more eggs per gram of body weight than this fish. When they lay their eggs, the tilapia female protects the eggs and the small little fish in their mouth. So they give them a head start in life. The other fish lay their eggs and they move on. And so tilapia, being the type of feeder that feeds on anything, just completely almost disappeared, that native species. But fortunately, nature has a way of balancing out many times. And so up to these few years, that native species again began to surface. It means that there was a check in nature and they started to control it. Other species started to feed on those now. And so now you can find this native species without any intervention from humans. This is not always the case. And in the case of Asian bean trips, 3 years ago, a farmer called me and said to me, I lost all my beans crop. I plowed in 100 acres. And when a farmer tells you that he destroyed his bean crop, when he tells a person who is a technician and knows something is not right, immediately bells started to go off. And I said, it's not right. I've worked as a technician in the field and never in my experience heard or saw a farmer plowed his bean crop in because of a pest. So I said to him, which pest is this? He said, I don't know what the pest is. We went to the field and found that there were trips. And I said, but this is a trips, man. We should be able to control this. He said, sir, I've tried everything and it doesn't work. Fortunately for the other farmers, their crop had already been mature and were being harvested at the time. So we had a late infestation, but that farmer did not harvest anything. Our reports of Guatemala said they had lost the entire crop. Florida reports having been tripped. Mexico says they do not have it yet. I don't know how, strangely. But it's in Belize, it's in Guatemala. And last week I got a call from my colleague in Guatemala. I said, hey, can you send somebody over to help me control being tripped? We were unprepared for it. There was no insecticide that could control it, one. And two, the few insecticides were highly toxic. And it's not something you want to promote in today's agriculture. So we're looking at some kind of organic formulation. The Asian bean trip has never been in Belize. It was never known to be in Belize. How it got here, only God knows how it got to Belize and Guatemala. Some believe there was a hurricane, I think, or some kind of storm, and in the winds it may have come. Or it came in a container, on a pallet, or something of that sort. But it is transported mainly by humans. Now today, the bean crop in Guatemala is being threatened. Food security is at risk here. The other example, glaring example, is the outbreak of screwworms. 30 years ago, screwworms were eradicated from Belize. It began in the US in the 1970s, late 60s, early 70s, moved on to Mexico in the 80s and 90s. 92, I think, Mexico declared free. Belize declared in 1994, after Salvador and Guatemala, Honduras, all the way down to Panama. South America has always had this. Yes. Colombia has it. But the thinking at the time was, if we control the reservoir of Darien, which is considered impenetrable, as a matter of fact, that's what stopped the Pan American Highway from moving to South America, Central America. It cannot be penetrated by humans. It is so dense and populated. I mean, there's so much wildlife in there, the hills, and I do not know the place physically, but I was told. And we maintain constant dispersal of flies in that area to maintain the population of fertile flies from coming across. That would have solved the problem. And it was so for 30 years. And all of a sudden, it appears in Panama. It appears, I think, in a child, because the migration that occurs now never occurred 30 years ago. The flow of trade of cattle from Nicaragua to Mexico was never what it was today. Nicaragua has, I think, 9 million head of cattle, of which 1 million find its way informally through Honduras into Guatemala and ends up in Mexico, passing just by Belize, not through Belize, just by Belize, not through Belize. And so again, this is an invasive species now, moved by humans, that has now caused the entire cattle industry in the region to be at risk. Not only the lives of the animals, but actually the economic implications it can have on small countries like Belize that have 6,000 small cattle farmers that own between 30 and 50 head of animal. And so the markets that you've worked so hard to establish one day can come tumbling down. Because the US doesn't want screwworm in their country, and neither do Mexico, and neither does Belize. So far, Belize and El Salvador are the only two countries in Central America that are free of screwworms. And we want to keep it that way. Now, again, this is a...
So you must have some protocols in place.
Oh, absolutely. We have had to, and this is my challenge of coming here to COP29, because I had so much things pending. We had to change legislation. We had to introduce new legislation to the House of Representatives to manage to control the movement of animals. One, to spray and to apply insecticide, a light cypermetride, which is a very safe insecticide, to the vehicles, to the trucks that come in from across the border. To put control points in the country, it had to be legislated. So that has gone to the House. It's been passed through its entire stages in one day. It was an emergency, and at the same time declare a state of emergency. Our laws at the time did not allow us to call a state of emergency for an outbreak of a disease, neither animal nor plant. So changing the law now, amending the Disaster Risk Act now allows us to declare a state of emergency. It allows us to draw down funds from our partners in the region that are helping us to combat this outbreak. And again, and just to show my staff, I was in Honduras, and we went to the site where they were dispersing flies. And the pupas were all set in crates. And I took about maybe 12 or 15 pupas, and I put them in a bottle like this. And I took it with me in the truck. So I want to see at what time they will emerge as adult flies. And so the truck has air conditioning. So I put it in the globe. And the technician told me, he said, by 3 o'clock, those should emerge as adult flies. Right? So I was watching it. And lo and behold, 3 o'clock, one fly had emerged under cool temperature in the vehicle. When I got to my hotel, I placed it in a warm spot where there's no air condition, and in 2 hours, all of them had emerged. It shows you the direct relationship with temperature and how the cycle is accelerated. And the same is for white flies, Bemisia tabasi. In hot, humid summer, the cycle for these flies are shortened tremendously, that it affects your crops quickly. So there's a direct relationship with the life cycle, the outbreaks, and climate change. And the hotter the temperature, the more outbreaks we will have, the greater economic situation we will face, and it is going to be disastrous if it's not controlled. And so those are the examples. The last example is Fusarium. I would not consider Fusarium to be an invasive species because it is present in the soil, it's been there, but it causes economic problems. It has never been a pathogen of sugarcane in the region, but it lives naturally in the soil as a fungus. But the high temperatures, the high humidity now has sparked the organism to now become a pathogenic causing agent. And now that is causing serious problems. We have 40,000, 43,000 acres being affected in different levels of severity. It is not something that can be controlled overnight. There is no single remedy. It has to be an integrated approach. It has to be carefully planned. It has to be the use of biological control. It has to be resistant varieties. It has to be different systems of managing the crop. It has to be improved technology. If you walk into a field, into a banana field with Fusarium in South America, and you walk into another field in Belize with the same shoe with mud on it, that's it. That's it. It's in the soil. And so these are the things that need to be managed. And so Fusarium is a challenge for us. And we are here today, and we are looking at alternatives. This morning I was on the telephone with my colleagues in Belize, looking at alternatives. What is it that we need to do to avoid that the sugar industry fall into the same category as the citrus industry in Belize? When we had citrus greening in Belize, there was no action taken in time. And today that industry is dying. There was never, I think, serious effort done to try to brace the disease. I cannot allow that to happen to the sugar industry. So we must find something to do and quick. The losses are going to be heavy this year, I believe. It's going to be more next year because you do not replace a variety overnight, a resistant variety. It takes time. We do not know which varieties yet are resistant. I understand Brazil has excellent research. We have to reach out to Brazil, ask them what are the varieties that you have worked on are resistant. They have experienced this disease, just like India, and they have to guide us as to see what is it that we can do, how we can get germplasm, what is the time will take to replant or replace all the varieties that are tolerant. And very important here.
That transitions us really nicely to our last speaker.
Yes, I must say.
Yes.
The only last thing I want to say is that it is a mistake to have one variety planted in one. It is a serious mistake.
Yes. Okay, so A.G. Caramaro, I think that was a really nice transition into A.G.'s experiences as Secretary of Ag in California and as a specialty crop, so multiple levels. So will you sort of tie some of this together for us?
Sure. Here at the climate conference, some 15 years ago, some of us showed up and we were dismayed that nobody wanted to talk about the global food system under the challenges of changing climate. And we realized that when you can't understand that the relationship between a changing climate, we say unpredictable weather, means unpredictable harvests, that becomes fairly easy to understand for many people once you say that. Once you understand that the global food system is in tremendous stress because of these kinds of new switches and changes in the way the world climate patterns operate. What isn't mentioned ever is that in the challenges of biodiversity, which emerges in some discussions in terms of biodiversity loss, so much of biodiversity loss and so much of crop loss is actually driven by invasive species and a lack of an infrastructure to protect our agricultural lands, our agricultural animals, or just all the life systems on the planet. Many times you might say a farmer's his job is to manage life systems and resources sustainably to be able to come out and make a crop. That is true, and the other responsibility, though, for humanity is that humanity has to understand, and it was just mentioned yesterday, this is a time where probably more people, especially in developed countries, are concerned about their food and what they eat. But it's probably also the highest percentage in history that doesn't know where the food comes from or how it gets produced or what are the challenges in producing that crop. And when that happens, you realize you don't have support. I have tremendous empathy and sympathy for Minister Mais, because as secretaries of agriculture, many times our goal is to promote agriculture, but it's very easy to say you can't promote agriculture if you can't protect it. And how many times can you be shut down in a quarantine, whether it's your avocados, whether it's your grapes, whether it's table grapes, whether it's your different kinds of products that are dealing with carnal bunt in wheat, whether it's an avian influenza outbreak, whether it's a Newcastle disease in your poultry populations. These kinds of invasive species can shut down an entire region, can then shut down an entire country. And suddenly you think you have a great economy in one of these product lines, but suddenly no one wants to ship and receive your product. Now, phytosanitary barriers were mentioned in the very opening clip here, and I think it's really important to understand, Ulrika, you said prevention is so very important. What goes with prevention is exclusion, right? You have the first step is that's the most inexpensive way is you protect yourself as a country, as a farm, as a people, as a world. You start to understand that the oldest conflict in history of civilization of mankind is there are things that want to eat you or feed on you. There are things that want to eat your food supply. There are things that want to feed on your domesticated animals and other parts of your infrastructure. That's the oldest conflict. Nothing has changed in the history of the world. In fact, it's more complicated than ever because today the pathways for introduction of new either invasive species or advantageous species that already exist in the area, as you mentioned with fusarium, nothing's changed but these complicated threats to our food systems has never been greater. And if we fail to understand that this infrastructure that you need to put into place, no different than this desire to build resilience for our food system here at a climate conference and look for dollars that go into building more ways to give us a predictable food system, a food supply, these are all kind of the components that go into having a world that can look forward because of that resilience, because of that sustainability, that we have a predictable food system. And as someone mentioned, just yesterday, they said a farmer that's in the red, it's hard for that farmer to go green. In other words, when the farmers are going out of business, when you lose an entire crop, because of an invasive species or a quarantine, you have a beautiful crop but you can't ship it and you have to strip it and throw it on the ground. You can't believe the kind of losses that occur, and suddenly a farmer's out of business. Suddenly a dairy industry is crippled and the whole area is shut down. These are the kinds of threats I think that are out here, and the fact that nobody was talking about it at this climate conference. Nobody was referring to this challenge and link between biodiversity loss, food loss. I mean, we talk about 30-40% of the world food supply is thrown away because it gets wasted. No one's talking about that enormous percentage of the food system that never gets to harvest because one of these diseases is shutting it down in somebody's field. And you hope the guy next door, like you said, or the country next door, isn't having the same problem. So let me wind up by just saying these steps of dealing with invasive species are pretty simple. There's prevention and exclusion, which is the best important way. Those are when you walk through a correct border crossing, you can tell that someone should be looking at your shoes, looking at the things you're carrying. That little package of meat that might be foot and mouth disease. That's $1 billion problem that some little old lady is carrying across a border because she wants to bring some tasty pork to one of her nephews or something. We understand that if you're not paying attention to this very old problem, we have trouble. And if we don't understand then that we must support governments must have budgets. The budget fights that I used to go through with invasive species, I can't tell you, I got rid of my entire export budget in California because our California government was shutting down my budget, and they told me, cut here, and I said, I can't cut our pest exclusion responsibility. And the responsibilities of all ministries of agriculture, whether it's at the county level, the state level, province level, or the national level, these are the infrastructural pieces that allow us to think that we, as farmers, can have a crop and get it to harvest because somebody's helping us keeping it clean. So exclusion, prevention, and then detection and delimitation, which is find out if you find an invasive species, locate it early and find out where is it, how big is it, how big is the infestation, contain it, and then you go to eradication. The last thing I want to say is you have to have a very robust toolbox to get rid of, take it to eradication. Eradication then means you have the most potent products in that toolbox that can shut it down, because if you don't shut it down, even if you leave a few, they'll just come back, right? And yet you have a lot of people in this room, in this conference, that want to take away those tools. But the same tools you use for eradication, for keeping things clean, are the same tools that we need to keep certain pests out and eradicate them. Doesn't mean you have to use them all the time. None of us like to think as farmers that we want to kill every bug in the field. We've learned that in many, many years. Specific kinds of tools that will take out the one thing that you're trying to eradicate, those are the best. But sometimes you need that bigger tool to shut everything down to try and clean up a problem. It's complicated, and obviously we can talk about all these things forever. But I wanted to thank Aika. I wanted to thank this panel too, because this idea that we have to protect our food system from things that we have always been suffering from, but more and more now we know in a changing climate are even more a threat and are accelerating in some of the severity that we see. So thank you for listening, and more importantly, thank you for paying attention, and we'll hope to continue to elevate this at the different United Nations platforms. because this moves across all the platforms of the United Nations efforts.
Yeah, I also want to say that this is just, you can see that we're out of time, and yet this is just a conversation that's begun. Our minister from Belize, I think I could have let you talk the entire hour and we'd have learned a lot of things, so we surely appreciate your contribution to that. I want to end and follow up on what AG has said, is that while FAO's plan of work mentions the whole issue of transboundary plants and pests, and that they pose threats to the food system. I have to say that there are only, I scanned it, I actually searched it very, very depth, and they mention it a little bit, and particularly they're concerned about pesticide and pesticide residue. And that's too late in some instances. We need to go back a little, and so one of the things that I'd like FAO encourage them is to take a little more proactive step towards some of country-level investments in protection. I want to end this with a invitation, a call to action, because this is just the beginning of a conversation that affects our food system greatly. And you'll see that the invitation is to elevate and to expand our cross-boundary public sector efforts to harmonize and strengthen sanitary protocols and improve monitoring, prevention, exclusion, diagnostic, delimitation, and eradication work across the globe. That's a big undertaking, but we already have lots of the pieces together. It's how do we knit them together, and how do we begin to build a cross-boundary effort to be able to do that. So we invite conservationists, agriculturalists, policymakers, political people to begin to think more seriously about this and realize that it is a threat to our food system. Again, I want to thank you so very much for being part of this conversation, and I hope you continue to have this conversation.